Hey everyone, it's Robin, RS Island Crafts, and welcome to my studio. For those of you who have been here a little bit, you may have seen the quilt shows that I've done previously, where I've pulled out some of the quilts and quilt tops that I've had sitting in Rubbermaid tubs for a bit, just to show you what I have in the house. After the last video, I mentioned, okay, that's it, that's all of them, I have no more. Well, I was mistaken. I found a bin in the fabric room where I'd put a bunch of quilt tops and some batting and binding and stuff to go with them, thinking I would eventually finish them. And I believe that's from the time when I was sorting through what was in the fabric room on the shelves for quilts to go to Project Linus, and a few of them I kept back for a variety of reasons. This is a baby quilt that I made with leftover fabric from bibs and burp cloths that I made for a friend's granddaughter several years ago. I went ahead and sewed all the pieces together in a disappearing 9 patch, and then I just flipped and flopped and turned them all helter-skelter and put them together. I thought I'd keep this one on hand in case I needed a quick baby girl quilt. I think a good 90 or 95% of the quilts that I'm going to show you today are ones that I've made since I've started this YouTube channel. So if you've been with me for maybe 3 or 4 years, you might recognize this fabric. This was a fat quarter. Well, I had a couple of fat quarters that I picked up at Walmart when they'd gone from having a crafting department with fabric with yards and yards of it. Then they pulled the fabric and crafting departments away. And then they brought it back and they just started having some pre-cuts and such. So this is as you see, a very colorful monster fat quarter bundle that I purchased. I showed how to make wonky quilt blocks, and then I made 2 quilts that are pretty much identical. I'll go ahead and put the next one up after this one anyways, even though they look just about the same. I think I used the same design for both of them. It's basically in the jelly roll race format, but I used fat quarters instead. And as you can see, there's little green squares in between. I definitely love the bright colors on this quilt. The striped fabric is pretty good too, but I thought that one just stands out just a little bit more than I would have wanted in this quilt. And here is the second one. I think at this time I was leaning towards more like a baby quilt or a quilt for a toddler to drag around the house, and not for a large quilt, because sometimes you just want to lay the baby on something small, and boy would this give the baby something colorful to look at once they're able to see colors and they're beyond the regular black, white, and red. While looking for a charity that I could easily work with, that wouldn't cost me a lot of money to ship things out, because we really don't have much local that I can make things for and bring them to them, just drive to them, I was making rare bears. And when you made the rare bears, they were going to children who had rare diseases, so they would give them these handmade stuffed teddy bears made from fun fabrics. And it was really great because you could mail them off unstuffed. So I didn't have to buy the stuffing, I didn't have to stuff them, and I also didn't have to have large boxes that would cost a lot of money to ship. You could pop these bunch of bears into a flat rate shipping envelope and just mail them out that way. So these are some of the leftover fabrics from that, and I can see some of my fabrics in there also. So this one was probably headed toward Project Linus. So I think I need to make another package and at least fill up a priority envelope and mail some of these quilt tops off. I'm pretty sure I showed this in a Talk to Me Tuesday, possibly early Whip It Wednesday. There was a quilt design that I found online where you could make a whole bunch of charity quilts easily and quickly by just cutting fabrics of the same measurements and then just mixing them up and making a variety of quilts. I think the person was trying to make 52 quilts, a quilt a week, or 50 quilts. This might have been right around the time of, it could have just been around the time of my 50th birthday, which would have been about 3 years ago, where I was making 50 items to donate for my 50th birthday year. But I ended up donating a bunch of things to the cancer center. In the beginning of my quilting career, quilting, crafting fun, whatever you want to call it, I joined in on a 9-patch a day that I'm pretty sure it was Crazy Mom Quilts was doing. You just took your scrap fabrics, and as you can see, even back then, I was really into the novelty fabrics, and you would make a 9-patch a day. And then at the end of the year, you just put it together in a quilt. I made a girl version and a boy version and turned them into twin size quilts. But as you can see, this was before I really was very good at doing sashing and making sure all of my quilt blocks were of equal size and such like that. So this is a little bit wonky. I'm pretty sure on the Talk to Me Tuesdays when I discussed this, I actually cut the twin quilts into halves, I believe, or something similar to cutting it in half to get these smaller pieces. Now I think I'm going to chop this up, maybe take out the sashing and just figure out what size all these 9 patches are, maybe sew them together into a donation quilt, or maybe I'll take the 9 patches and turn them into coasters or mug rugs or something like that. That would be a great way to have a bunch of coasters, or even turn them into fabric postcards. When I put the next one up, I'll measure the squares and I'll see what they are. And I think they're possibly 6.5 inches. Maybe we were using 2.5-inch squares. So this is 9-patch version 1. So this is another girl version of the 9-patch a day. So this is number 2. And yes, they were supposed to be 6.5-inch squares, but I think mine were more 6.25 because I had definitely not found my 1/4-inch seam, considering I just found it, in the last year. Since they're not quite perfect, I don't see a problem with just taking a rotary cutter and trimming off the seam allowances and maybe just putting it down with batting, not even worrying about squaring it up until I quilt it, and then just turn them into a whole bunch of fun coasters. Other than that, I can't see a way of using them besides taking it apart, trimming them up, and then putting them back together into a quilt, or even just sending the 9 patches all away. I could always trim them all down to 6 inches or 5.5 inches and then just send them away. They don't have to be absolutely perfect and square, but I like the idea of taking some of them for a coaster. Like that one right there, that would be a fun coaster. That's from, I think that's a mixture of the Oh Cheerio fabric, and then I don't know what the flowers are. That's another fun one that I think someone who likes those types of fabrics and colors, there's a matching one down there. I think they would enjoy having that as a coaster. Or I could just go crazy and sew them together and make placemats or sewing machine mats. But I think the idea of coasters, even if I just put them as add-ins in my shop, so if you purchase so many items, spend so much money, I can tuck a couple coasters in for fun. So if you were to purchase from my Etsy shop and you were to receive one of these coasters and you don't actually like it, you can always give it away as a gift, give it to the grandkids, the kids, put it in the mailbox for the mailman at Christmas time, or as just a thank you for even the trash guys. They like little token gifts too. 9-patch a day version 3. I do remember having the grandest time. I had so much fun working on this. Sometimes it worked out right, and I'd make an actual 9-patch, and I'd do the lights and darks, even if it was football neon greens and pinks. And other times I just did them scrappy and just threw a whole bunch of squares together. I was thinking it would be fun for kids to just have like an I Spy 9-patch quilt with a whole bunch of things on it. I didn't even care if it was like, so you have 3 blues there, but none of the rest went with it. It was just fun to be quilting along and sewing along with a community for an entire year. I'm not sure how long I kept up with it, but I know obviously I made a whole bunch of these, and I have some more just sitting in the fabric room in a leftover squares container. Now you can see that we're more into the what would be considered a boy version. Now I know that you can go either way, that boys can like pink and girls can like footballs, But at that time, I was just going more of the bright, colorful, standard, usual girl colors, and then more of the darker boy colors. And since I was thinking along the lines that many parents still want, like for baby quilts and stuff, there's such a variety of parents. Some want the very specific and they want pinks for girls and blues for boys, and others want more of the black, whites, and reds, the big contrast, and other parents just want a mixture of colors. They just like all of the rainbow. And then you have parents who are going for a theme. My daughter had a baby shower recently, and they were doing like a jungle theme with like giraffes. So jungle themes are very popular, I've noticed, for babies, because that can go either way, and it's something that can grow. Because when you do something for a baby and you make it baby style, it doesn't always grow with the toddler. I like to have a quilt, as I mentioned before, that a toddler is going to want to drag around. So as they're going through, so it all depends on whether they're going through I don't know what the new things are for toddlers and everything, but my kids did Blue's Clues and Power Rangers. I did Electric Company and Sesame Street, and then there's always Mr. Rogers that goes generational. So I wanted to just throw things in that weren't going to keep it as a baby quilt. This one even has Halloween fabric that I see. This is a nice underwater scene. So that's boys number 1. And here is boys number 2. Pretty much the same stuff. There are a few that actually are 9 patches. They're standard opposites so that you can see them. In the beginning, I didn't know too much about mixing them up and having a dark with the 5 and then a light with the 4, and then the next one you had to do it. So then you can see that right here. So I started doing one with a dark 5, and then I switched it on the other one, just trying to keep things mixed up, because at that point when we first started, we were talking about putting them together with no sashing and anything. And again, you can see my sashing skills just weren't there yet. But you know what? When you first start making quilts, you don't know how to make these things. Making a quilt isn't something you can just learn from a book. You can have the knowledge of how to make a quilt, but until you put your fingers to the fabric, to the sewing machine, and you're cutting and you're doing everything, you really aren't knowing exactly how a quilt is going to work until you do it. And it's another thing that just takes practice, like being a painter or a sketcher, or even if you're building cabinetry. So whatever it is, whatever craft you're doing, it takes practice. We expect someone who is new to the kitchen and cooking and baking, we expect them to make food that you really don't want to eat. We don't want to have to deal with it. We don't want to have to eat bad food. A lot of times we've called out for pizza in my early parts of my relationship with Rob, but it's just something you have to learn. You have to test things out. And it's no different with quilting. It's just fabric versus cocoa powder, sugar, and eggs. Maybe a little flour too. Had to really zoom out for this one. You can see where I'm hiding the closet mess with that's a piece of green corduroy fabric. So this one is from Talk to Me Tuesday. They did block swaps and fabric swaps every year, and this one year that I joined in, they were swapping 2.5-inch jelly roll type strips. You created your own, and you just had, I think you had to have a certain amount of them, so many different fabrics so people could play with them and create what they wanted. I made this lap quilt for myself. It's fun. I can pick out, like, okay, this is my fabric, because I made some for myself also. And that's my fabric, the 2 right there. And then there's some batiks in there, and then this gorgeous flower fabric. So there's a lot of fun fabrics in there, and I just added enough fabrics so that I can create this rail fence blocks that would be large enough for me to snuggle up with in my chair or on the couch or whatever. This is one of maybe a handful of quilts that I really would like to actually get finished at some point, get it quilted, and so I can use it myself. But it's really hard for me because I don't use many quilts at all in the house. I really only use one on my bed. So I don't use one on the couch or anything because lately, most of the winters, it really hasn't gotten very cold and I haven't had a need to snuggle up underneath a blanket. But it would be nice to have them done so that in the future, when I did need something or I do want something, it would be available to me. Some of you may recognize this quilt, or at least the idea of the blocks. This was from a previous tutorial, probably 3 years or older. I don't remember exactly when I did this, but I was showing you how to take string blocks and turn them into half square triangles so that you can create this quilt. So you would have half the amount of string blocks that you would normally need if you were going to make an entire quilt. And not everyone wants string blocks all in your face and that craziness. So this was a way to use your string blocks and put a calming fabric next to them. So you can use a solid or a blender type fabric to make those half square triangles. And as you can see, I bordered it out in the same color. So that really just kind of, I like the border on it like that, so you don't have, like I didn't use a different color. Like if you had this is like a bluish gray color. It just reminds me of like uniform pants and stuff. So if I had that on the center blocks and then maybe I put a white border on it or something like that, I don't think it would have that same effect. When I'm looking through the camera right now, I can see the string blocks kind of like floating up off of it. Those colors are what's popping to me. So depending on how you do your quilting, you can always quilt it heavier in the solid color and have your strings pop, or just do an overall total meander or straight line quilting. Any type of quilting would work on this. This would be a great charity quilt because you could practice your quilting. Let's say if you're a long armor or you're on a domestic and you just want to figure out some of your quilting styles. Maybe you want to learn stitch in the ditch, or if you want to stitch these triangles and just do it along there, or again, you know, free motion quilt all over the place. Even when you're free motion quilting with a quilt like this, you can still only quilt inside the background color. It would be really easy to go from here and just sneak down in those points into the next area. This is another one from the same series. We learned how to make our string blocks, and then we learned different ways that we can change them around and turn them into a quilt. So this time we're still using the half square triangles, but we made a zigzag design, and I absolutely love the black with the bright colors. And even though it'd be a great way to use up some of these bins of scrappy fabrics that I have and just to change it up, because with a string block, remember, you can have any width strip you like. If you look at these, some of them have the same strip width in them, but most of these are just scraps that I sewed down, and whatever worked. It didn't matter if it was 1.5 inches or if it was 2 inches. I tried to stay away from anything larger than a jelly roll strip, and that's mostly because I didn't want to have a big chunk of fabric taking up my block, especially if I'm making a block that's going to be a 6.5 inch string block or a 9.5. I really enjoy making things like a 9.5 inch block. I just seem to like that middle number. 6.5 is small and 12.5 is large. When I'm making 12.5 inch string blocks, I always find that I have to either piece fabric to get that long strip down the diagonal and the first couple pieces on either side, or I have to cut from yardage to get scraps, and that kind of defeats the purpose of making a scrappy quilt. And actually I can see, I don't know if you can tell, but right there is a selvage. So at one point I didn't even know, and early on, that you're not supposed to have the selvages in the actual quilt. So every one of these, it's a red Christmassy with gold and green on it. Almost every one of those has a piece of selvage. So anytime you see like that little white bit there and that little white bit there, yep, that's the selvage peeking out. But you know what? In this quilt, I think it's going to be perfectly fine. It's all nice and secure. You're not having to worry about having a tight selvage and the block being all out of wonk because of it. Most of these are really small bits, and obviously it's sewn into the quilt top and it looks great to me. string blocks have a black center because I was making them in the past for a specific quilt. I still use them here, and even that just still adds a little bit to it. But if you could picture this and have each of these rows in the colorful string blocks, if you did your blocks in one color, and then you could have a rainbow. So if you want to have the first one be red and then the next one be orange, etc., etc. Or if you just want to have all blues, and you can choose any background you want. Again, from the same string block series, we went ahead and make half square triangles. Half square triangles are just a great way to incorporate those scrappy blocks and use up any leftovers that you might have and to put them here. I can actually see like right here that is the match to the one next to it. I might have tried to do that a few times. I don't know. The black center strip on those, that one looks like it came from the same thing. I can see Dora the Explorer in a couple places. Or you can do some type of thing with the color again and make sure that everyone's going to work together. This is another fun variety. I think you could really play with the fabrics and do some type of thing that gives it almost a pinwheel swirling effect. But it's, again, like I said, just a great way to use up scraps or have it be a planned project. And there you go. If you make your borders the same color as your background, and it's all set. Using the black, or maybe if you don't like black, you can always use a lighter color. Maybe you don't like white quilts either. I've been finding that I really enjoy a silver gray or a charcoal gray. But this would also be fun using any color on the background and having a nice fun colors to pop off the front. If you love yellows, you can put a nice little gray color on the back and then have all of your scrappy yellow blocks popping off. So I think if you just make your string blocks all in one color and just sew your scraps and have a good time, you can worry about what it's going to turn into later. You can make so many string blocks so quickly without even paying attention. Set a timer for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Set yourself up for success and already have your strips ready to go and keep them in a little basket or a bin. And then just pull it off the shelf, set a timer for 30 minutes, sew as many blocks or as many strips down as you can, and then put the basket away for another day. So runners, they always warm up before they run, so maybe you want to warm up before you get into your really good projects. Then you can always sew your scraps and get yourself all warmed up and ready to go, and then move on to your good projects. You would use up your scraps and you'd be feel like you did something, accomplished something every day, even if you're working on like maybe a Bonnie Hunter mystery quilt that takes a long time and a lot of pieces to make before you actually see any progress. That is the last quilt in this quilt show. I am not going to say it's the last one because I saw some quilts sitting on the bottom shelf. I think I've shown you those quilts though. When Rob was sick and he went into hospice care here at home, I recorded a whole bunch of videos for like Talk to Me Tuesdays and stuff, just showing all the different quilts that I had in the house, and I probably showed some that I've shown in these other videos. So if that's what's down there on that bottom shelf, I won't be showing them again, so we could actually be done today. So those are my hidden treasures. Do you have any hidden treasures that you may have forgotten about, or you know in the back of your mind, I know I have this tub somewhere that's got quilts in it? I say grab them out, see what's in there, donate what you can't use, and then just work on them slowly, especially if you're trying to practice a new skill. If you're trying to improve your quilting, quilt on something like this and donate it to a charity. I know I ran into a lady at the flea market locally that was making quilts to sell to raise money for our local humane society. I'm more of a make a top and donate it and let someone else figure out the rest, but that doesn't always work out that way. So thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!